Hello everyone, this is Nguyen with BlueFirePoker.com. Today I'll be doing the audio for the second part of the 100 NL session that I released last week, the first part of. It's actually kind of annoying because I did finish the audio for this, but I kind of fail at Camtasia and have to do it again. But fortunately, I usually do better the second time around anyway, so hopefully that'll be the case this time as well. So this is about where I left off last week. 9-10 suited, I think it's pretty standard flat there. The hand plays pretty well post flop. It's a min raise. I'm in position, so I'm getting 3-1 and position on presumably weak player, and flop an open-ended straight draw. So there's a couple options here on what we can do, and I'll kind of wait for his action before we make any decisions. Okay, so he bets $2 into $4 or $3.80 rather. And here's a spot where a lot of times with air I do raise, and by raising here I really don't represent much, right? So imagine I flatted pre-flop with King Jack, King 10, and called, or I mean, yeah, I just called with King Jack or King 10. On this particular board, I'm usually just gonna flat with those hands, right? Because I do think he has air a lot. He's going to be folding it a lot of the time, and basically anytime he continues, unless he has a weak king for a reason, he's going to beat me. Like he's going to have two pair or whatever else when he calls a raise. So this is a spot where if I do have like King X top pair, or Ace 8 or something like that, I'm probably not raising so often, but I don't really worry about my own hand range all that much against weak fishier players. I kind of worry about their hand range. Since their hand range misses here, if I had complete air, let's say I had Queen 6 suited or whatever, I'd raise here a lot and expect to take it down, even though it doesn't make that much sense for me to raise here that often because I won't have much very often. I do have a open-ended straight draw, so I have 8 outs to the nuts, and I have a backdoor flush draw as well. So my hand is pretty strong here, and I think I can raise here, and I'm comfortable with raising because I have 10 high, frankly, and it's not going to be the strongest hand. Like it won't show down very well, but I do have outswing called, so I think raising here is fine. Calling is fine as well. Keeps the pot small. I still have position, and I could outmaneuver him on later streets. So the queen comes off, and it's not like a card that'll help me. Like a spade would certainly be much better. Um, Obviously, a 9 or 10 improves my hand a bit too, and any of the straight cards would be significantly better than the queen. But he bets $2 into $7.60, so his betting has remained static, right? So he's not increasing the size of his bet, and this typically is pretty weak, and it's sort of in the mold of a blocking bet where he doesn't want to check, he doesn't want to fold. So that said, I still have 10 high in the turn, and I think a raise is in order here because of how often I think it's going to work. And since I don't think he's leading here with air, like $7.60, it wouldn't make too much sense for him to lead here with total air, maybe like ace high. But I think a lot of time it's like a blocking defensive bet with like 7x, 8x, pocket fives or something like that. So if I were to raise here on the turn, which I believe I do, it would be with the intention of barreling the river as well. Uh, like if he has a 7 or 8, it's pretty reasonable for him to call, right? One time, kind of see where I'm at. And on the river, most rivers, this one isn't a great one to do so because he's a lot more likely. Like the board didn't get scary; it just like kind of improved um, his holding against my range because it gives me a lot less combos of Queen X. I might stop betting King X in his eyes. I might not value bet that thin. Like my perceived range, if I do bet, it won't include a lot of hands like pocket jacks or something like that, and reasonably so. So I mean, this is going to be a bad river to bluff because I think he will look me up a ton with basically any pair. But if the queen was instead a even a 4 or 3 or something like that, I think it's quite a bit better because when he does take that line and blocks on the turn, I think he really does have 7x, 8x a lot, and he'd be fairly inclined to fold it on the river. So I'd probably bet about $14 there into 21, and I guess it would need to work. I don't know, about 38% of times, somewhere roughly in that range for it to work, and I think he certainly folds a slightly larger percent, so the bluff would have been plus EV on the river, but I don't think I'm getting all that many folds on this particular river, so I'm comfortable giving up if he were to check to me. And he doesn't even check, so he makes another blocking bet. Again, I'm inclined to believe he has a 7 or 8, or is making some sort of like fake blocking bet with a king, but um, I'm comfortable with my read there and my play. Okay, so with ace king off, typically like when you have ace king, it's going to be a 3-bet and mandatory 3-bet in most situations. This situation, however, is a little bit different. Not only did the player open from under the gun, meaning his range is going to be particularly tight, he has not raised yet in 21 hands. So, I mean, all things considered, I think his hand range here is going to be pretty narrow and pretty tight, right? Ace King is going to play much, much better against this player's single raising range rather than his like 3-bet calling range or his 4-betting range. So I think with Ace King off here, I think a call is in order. So we flop well. We flop top pair, top kicker. If we like imagine his pre-flop raising range from that position and his frequencies thus far, leading this to be his first raise. I mean, I would think it'd be like ace queen plus, pocket tens plus, and that it seems fair enough. So on this particular board, right? I mean, it hits him like he's gonna have ace king. He might have king queen. He'll have aces. He'll have queens. He'll have jacks. He'll have tens. So we're beating, I think, most of his combinations. But if he were to bet here, given how tight I think his range is, I would just call. If we raised, right, he's going to fold out queens, he's going to fold out jacks. He'll continue with pocket tens, pocket kings, ace king, and pocket aces. So if we raise, like let's say he bet, and if we raise, I think it's certainly a mistake against this player. I would check with the intention of calling. Okay, so he checks back. What hands could he potentially check back with, considering what we think his range is? Well, he could have checked back ace queen, which is perfectly reasonable. That just made a pair. He could have checked back queens, jacks, maybe pocket nines if he had those hands. So I think it's this card isn't that great because I mean pocket queens got there, but as well I think this board isn't that great because it hits a lot of his range, and we are ahead of it. So, I mean, we could lead here, and I think leading is fine because he will call with ace queen and maybe like ace 10 if he has those. But even ace jack got there, so we don't beat all that much. Yeah, I decided to lead anyway, and I don't hate the lead too much. We still have ace king, and I mean it got checked through, and he min raises, which is extremely strong against his range. We have top pair, top kicker. I think at a minimum he has like the worst hand he can have here is probably king jack, and that's one of the only hands we can beat. It is a min raise, so I'm only calling 550 into a pot that's $25. So I think calling is fine and reevaluating on the river. Likely check folding on the river because I think he has way too many sets and two pairs here and straights. And the river comes off a king, right? Normally, like three of a kind with top kicker is going to be extremely valuable and like a spot where we stack off a lot. Um, but against this player, if like we have a couple options, we can check and call, which I think is okay because or I don't even know. Like he's pretty passive, it looks like, so I don't think he's gonna be bluffing, and there's not much he can bluff here with. Like, is he gonna turn like ace 10 into a bluff or make a thin value bet with ace 10 or ace queen? I mean, probably unlikely. Um, is he going to turn pocket jacks into a bluff? Like if he had an open-ended straight draw on the turn and he kind of wanted to slow me down by making like a blocking raise and then checking behind in the river, is he going to turn that into a bluff? I think that's kind of unlikely as well. So if we check here, um, I think a majority of his betting range is going to be way ahead of us. So I think we probably fold if he makes a decent size bet on the river. If we were to bet, however, like even though we are beat quite a bit, like pocket queens, king queen, pocket tens, there are still like a few hands in his hand range that will call, right? So I think ace queen will call if he has ace 10 that was making some weird blocking bet, that will call. Pocket jacks as well may call. It improves to two pair or whatever. It's not going to be ahead that often, but I think in this particular situation, his calling range will be much wider than his betting range, right? And if we do intend on check calling, which I may or may not do, I'm not sure. I think it's better just to lead, right? If we were planning on check calling, like if you bet $20 here, 100% of the time, I would much rather just lead because I don't. I think I think that's the only way we'd get money in ahead a lot of the time. Like I think he far too often is going to be checking back ace queen and pocket jacks and the only way that if money goes in on the river and us doing okay reasonably well against the range is by leading rather than check calling. So I hope I led him. I don't remember if I did. Yep. So I decided to bet, and it's certainly with the intention of bet folding. If he raises here, there's no way I'm calling. Like a player that hasn't raised in 21 hands raises me on the turn and then raises my river lead. Like my hand should look pretty strong here because he raised me on the turn and I retook the lead, right? So if he were to raise here, I think I'd fold and feel really good about it. But he does call with queens, so he had a boat there, which is kind of weird. I think most players at 100 NL, like if they had three kings there, if I most 100 NL regs with ace king there would bet call if they did lead. So I think there's a ton of value in raising with that particular boat there from Reckless's point of view. I mean, he owned me because I was intending on bet folding, but against the average 100 NL reg, I'd much rather raise that river in his spot. We are heads up. The table broke on the bottom right table, and I won't talk about it too much because I'm mainly trying to emphasize 6 max play throughout this video. But the player was weak, and I was hoping I didn't have to join another table, so I just kind of left it open and was waiting for the table to fill. As a standard, like against 33 big blind stacks, I sometimes min raise or limp, but he doesn't 3-bet, so I think it's perfectly fine to just open 3x. In the top right, I have 10 jack suited, which is a strong hand, obviously. And it's a hand I think my hands are tied here. I can basically only call. I hate folding, and I hate 3-betting as well. He has 38 big blinds, so if I do make it, $11 here, 11.50, I'm putting in about 25% effective stack. So I kind of put myself into a bad spot because 10 jack suited doesn't play well hot or cold. If he shoves, I mean, I hate folding, giving pot odds, and I don't like calling either because we have jack high. So it's going to be a pretty standard call in this spot. and the board comes ace 9 4 and he checks, right? So this is a board when someone opens under the gun. It's a board where you kind of just see bet because you put a lot of ace x hands in their range, so they can fire at this board and expect a lot of folds. When someone does check, though, I don't expect them to have check this board with air all that often. Like if you had king queen, king jack, um, something like that, something that doesn't show down all that well, and totally miss this board. I expect him to bet most of his air. Is what I'm trying to say. So I guess I can eliminate a lot of ace x hands here, and I could eliminate a lot of um, like air from his range. So what that leaves is mid pairs like 9x. If he happened to have like 4 or 5 suited, which I doubt because his preflop raise is 4%, and he doesn't even have that many nines in his range. Well, a small sample, but given my perception of him, I don't think he has many fours or many nines. So what he does have is like pocket tens, pocket jacks, pocket queens, pocket kings, right? All of those hands I think will be check calling this flop. So firing one barrel here I think is a huge mistake. If your intention is like, okay, he checked, he's probably gonna check fold. When I bet one time here, that's really bad because he's gonna usually call. Let's say he has jacks here, he's gonna call once with jacks and then reevaluate on the turn. And then if you shut down at that point, you basically just gave him $5 for free because I wouldn't expect most players to just check fold this board. So don't fire one. If you do intend to fire multiple barrels, then go ahead and fire on multiple streets. I mean, if you do intend on bluffing, fire multiple streets. So the 4 is not a good card, and I sort of set up the bet sizing for a multi-street bluff because I think it works better. It gets him to fold pocket queens a lot more often. And by doing so, I set it up by betting half pot on the flop. Like I said, I don't think that one barrel is going to work very often, so I don't even need to fire like $6 into 8 on the flop. I just bet 450 because the effective stacks, we started 40 big blinds. By betting small on the flop and turn allows for like a decent sized river shove. And since I thought it was more likely that he's folding, pocket jacks to 3 barrels than one, I set it up so that the bet sizing would go check call flop, check call turn, and hopefully check fold river. So I'm gonna bet smallish here again on the turn. And again, I don't think he's going to be folding that often. Hopefully he does. But I set up an amount, right? So it's 750, so it's going to be 30.90, and I'm shoving $27 into 31, and I think this is going to be a lot more effective. Imagine if I instead bet 12 on the turn, which I think is a more standard amount. If I bet 12 on the turn, there would have been 24. I don't remember what the pot size was anymore, but I think 24, 16, $40, and like it would have been $25 into $40 on the river, which wouldn't. I mean, he'd still like feel a lot better about calling the river there because he has good pot odds. He still has pocket jacks, pocket queens, or whatever he has. But the way I set it up was to bet small, and then I guess effectively shove the river for about pot size. And I think the pot size shove will look a lot bigger in his eyes because, it's a higher percentage of the pot, even though the amount would be similar if I set it up the other way. So, I mean, when you do decide to bluff or value bet, carefully decide what bet size on the river will accomplish whatever you want to accomplish. So if I had ace 9 here, I would definitely not set up the bet sizing in the way I did here. I'd much rather bet the 24 into, or the 22 into 40 or whatever, because I think he's going to call there a lot more often. But when I am bluffing, I like to set up the pot size to look like this. And he does fold. So hooray me, that worked out. And the bottom right table is filling up. I open up tons of buttons three-handed. I think it's pretty standard. On a king six deuce, I don't think he has that much that often. Like this is his first hand here, right? And I obviously don't know anything about him, so I just have to assume he's average 100 NL player. Like on a king six deuce, like he's not going to be leading a six, or I don't think he is at least. But the average player wouldn't. He's not leading a deuce. Um, I guess he may lead some kings, but a lot of players just rather check because people at 100 NL c bet too much, right? So it's a lot better for him to check call. So I think a lot of time on a dryish board, his range is going to be made up of air. So I could probably pick it up on the Turner River a ton here. So I decided to make a float on the flop and actually pick up a pair on the turn, and my hand ranks to be best, I think, against his range because he basically, unless he defends six deuce or king six or king deuce, pretty much can only have sets and king X here that he's leading twice for value. So I think my eight plays pretty well against his range, and at 100 NL first hand, if someone takes the lead line, I think they'll have air a ton. So I make some loose-ish call downs, and he checks. It's going to be like a snap check behind, and he did lead with the deuce, which is kind of surprising, but he's bluffing with it on the turn. So again, you can probably own me with this in the future. Just next time you pick up, if you have pocket tens there, just lead twice, and I'll pay off. But for the most part, I've seen that be air way too often, especially first hand, for me to fold there. The top left, there's a limper. I isolate, get a call from the blinds, and then the limper called as well, right? So 7-6-5 is not a good board for me to fire into three other players. This one ranks to hit them, at least one of them, and giving them a pair and a draw, a straight draws, two pair sets, blah blah blah, whatever. So this is not a spot where you want to see bet against the other players. It hits their ranges pretty wide when they don't three bet pre-flop. So if it folded around to me, checked around to me, I would certainly just check back and give up on the hand. Seven five suited is a good one to three bet bluff with because it's not quite strong enough to call with, making it the best candidate to three bet bluff. But given stack sizes, my hands are tight again, and I can't really three bet bluff this player. Anytime I would three bet him, it'd be for value, because it sucks getting it all in pre-flop with seven high. So it's pretty much a standard fold. I can't call there either. I wouldn't have the implied odds to call with a weak hand like that. Flop top pair against probably an overly aggressive opponent. See, it's going to be a pretty standard continuation bet, and if he did check raise, I would very likely call there and reevaluate the turn because he is over aggressive. We've known that, and it looks like a board he's going to check raise a ton. He gets checked through on the turn, which I think is kind of standard. Like he's not going to have too many fives in his range. When he peels the flop, I think he has ace X a lot. He's going to have random hands like king 10, jack 10, two overs that are trying to spike a pair and win. And then it gets checked through. He checks on the river as well. I frankly don't think I'm going to be behind all that often. He would have check raised most two pairs on the flop. When it gets checked through on the turn, it means I'm unlikely to have a straight, right? So I don't have a 5 here ever. So I think he'd bet two pair on the river. And I'm sneaking in like a razor thin value bet here, only because I do think he has ace high a lot when he doesn't bet here, or like a weaker six, something like 6-7, 6-8, something like that. So I think he will call here quite a bit given pot odds. And with the hands I'm targeting, like ace high, some king highs, 6x, maybe 3x or whatever, like ace deuce, ace 3. I don't think he's going to call like a huge bet here. So I think if I do make a value bet, it's going to be small. I do think a check is going to be fairly standard there, right? He did have ace deuce. I think a check is going to be fairly standard there, but if I don't think my hand is behind very often, and I think he will be paying off, smallish bets like there. If I make one of those every 100 hands, it's going to really add to my win rate, right? So that's additional 3 big blinds I can add to my win rate. So there are many hands I have going here that I can play. The 4-6 suited is one I'm not particularly thrilled about. If I was on the button, I would certainly call. If the player directly to his right called and eagle eye called, then I would certainly call as well because I'm getting a lot better price on my money. The hand plays better multi-way. But out of position against the player, even though I have him marked as a fish, um, I don't want to play out of position with a weak hand, right? More often than flopping flush draws and straight draws, which are reasonably easy to play, but not like wonderful to play out of position. I'm gonna flop second or third pair, and those kind of suck, right? Like those put you in tough spots. So imagine the flop came um, ace 8 6, and we check and duty fang bets. Like a lot of time he's betting his air there, but it's difficult for us to continue with third pair out of position, like calling, and then we're going to check turn and reevaluate it again, face another difficult decision if he bets. So rather than open ourselves up to these difficult decisions by calling with speculative hands out of position, just fold them early and fold them before the flop and avoid all those difficult decisions. Like it's going to be a lot better if we cater our games to putting other people in difficult decisions, right? So it's if people fold or call way too often out of position, especially with hands like 6-4 suited or like 6-5 offsuit, 7-5 suited, that type of thing. Like a lot of the weakish hands, they're going to be in those tough decisions against us when we're in position. That's what we want. We don't want to face the tough decisions. We want to put other people in tough decisions, and that will happen a lot more likely if we cater our game towards position. So shorten things up, just fold those weakish hands out of position. King 7 is, I think, a fine complete there. I play pretty tight. I fold some hands, but people that limp the button are going to be bad and passive usually. So I think I can outmaneuver that player. PDM is tight as it is, so I think I can play, even though I'm in the worst position post flop. I think I can play it pretty fine. And I flop nut flush draw and just lead for pot standard, and that's going to happen a lot. I'm going to have air. PDM is going to usually be folding post flop. ECU, who limps the button, is going to try to make a hand before continuing. So I think even though I am out of position, I can win enough of the small pots there to make a complete profitable. 10-3 suited up top is like kind of loose. Like at the bottom left table with a tight player directly to the left and a bad player direct or 2 seats to my left, I can open up a hand like that. But in the top left, small sample on Kit 3000. He's playing 2020, so he plays a reasonable amount of hands and probably plays them aggressively because he hasn't called or limped yet. Baby Don't Cry playing 2118 with an 11.2% 3-bet percentage. So I think this is probably a little bit loose at this table. I should probably fold because I think they're going to either call and play well enough post flop for me to not open it properly, or Baby Don't Cry is going to 3-bet me at a decent enough frequency where my open on this button won't be profitable. And that's something that you should really evaluate, like what range of hands you want to open in every spot based on the table dynamics, rather than following just like basic hand ranges. What I noticed from playing a few sessions while I was making these videos at 100 NL, that they haven't changed all that much. So I played quite a bit last year, 6 max 100 NL, and the games were sort of soft. I think I won at about 4 to 5 PTBB last year, and I think it's like perfectly reasonable for a lot of the Blue Fire members that improve from the microstakes games, work hard on their games to still win 4 to 5 PTBB at 100 NL now. The games seem reasonably soft, and I mean, there aren't too many solid regs, and there are a lot of fish still. So certainly, consider moving up from 50 NL once you have the roll. It's not too much tougher than 50 NL, so you'll do perfectly fine if you are beating 50 NL for a decent amount. I guess so far, like I've been playing a slightly looser, but pretty close to what I normally play. Top two tables 26 21, 27 23. I guess it's pretty close to what I normally play. The bottom two tables, part of it on the bottom right was heads up, so that's going to be skewed a little bit. So I imagine it's like 28 24, and then 37 29 on the bottom left because the players on my left are so tight. Um, these are all reasonable. I don't think it's too loose. I haven't gotten way out of line, as you guys have seen. And the thing that's pretty beneficial about opening a lot and three betting a fair amount is that people just think you're kind of nuts, right? So at the bottom left table where I played 37 29, and even at the bottom right where I played 27 23, I'm probably the loosest, most aggressive player there, and people likely are going to misinterpret that as me being kind of like a maniac, right? As you guys have seen through last week's video and this week's video, is that I haven't been all that out of line. I've been opening a lot and picking good spots to bluff and making, relatively thin value bets. But the players at the table, like, their perception of me has to be that I'm very loose, very aggressive, probably getting way out of line just based on my pre-flop tendencies, which is going to be beneficial because I haven't made too many moves, played relatively inline post-flop, but I'll get a lot more action, a lot more credit when I'm putting in money post-flop due to my pre-flop looseness, which is a huge benefit because I think how loose I am pre-flop isn't even that loose, and usually plus EV in a vacuum, but it gains me tons of EV in other spots when I do make hands. Like because I've been opening quite a bit of buttons. Like I think with aces here, I get a lot more action, and I do get three bet here, so I do get a lot more action than a standard player. Like imagine Eagle Eye opened, and he was in my spot, so he's playing 16-5, stealing 10% of the time. He's not going to get three bet all that often. So even though I do risk, or even though I do like steal a lot from the button and steal a lot from the cutoff, blah blah blah. Like when I do pick up aces and kings and queens, I'm a lot more likely to get three bet as well. So it's going to be hugely beneficial for my game to play that loose. So here I do get three bet, and I think the decision's close here. I don't always four bet. I don't always just call. This is like the first time in 40 hands that he's three bet, so I think his hand is probably pretty strong, or he could be playing back at how frequently I've been opening the button. So I mean, I think it's close here between calling and trapping a little bit and then raising a C bet, or calling a C bet and then betting turn if he checks to me or whatever, or four betting here. I think I lean towards four betting because it's the first time he three bet, so I think his range is a little bit stronger. So if he does have pocket tens, I think he's a lot more likely to go with it than if he if I get call and then it comes king jack four or whatever, then it kind of sucks like when scare cards come. So I don't really mind a call, and I'd be a lot more likely to call if he was a habitual three better that's going to be c betting too many times or too often on the flop. I think it'll be a lot more profitable in that situation. But since I think his range is pretty tight there, and he has a hand he can go with a decent amount, I think four betting is fine as well. 10 jack suited, I'm certainly going to isolate if Roach doesn't. If Roach does isolate, I'll probably call. But as you've seen so far, like when people limp, they're playing so fit or fold that I think it's just a big mistake not to isolate them with any two until they start playing back. Because if you see there, like to win $10, I bet 550, so it needs to work. I mean, between a quarter of the time and a third, whatever the math is, and he just snap folded. So he didn't even consider calling. He didn't even consider check raising, floating, whatever else. He just looked at his hand, saw it didn't fit the board, and like insta folded. So um, we can certainly exploit these players that are just trying to hit flops by stealing all the small pots. Jack nine suited. The hand is pretty, like one I certainly want to play. If I was on the button, I would definitely call or squeeze. Or I wouldn't squeeze because suck eye has $20, so my hand doesn't play that well hot or cold, so I don't really want to get it in. But I would probably call. But out of position, like I said again, I don't call in these speculative spots because like way too often. Like let's say I flop a jack here or a nine, and it's a jack or nine high flop. I mean, I rank to have the best hand, but if I lead and get raised or I check call, like it's not going to be favorable that often. I'm just facing way too many tough decisions anytime like significant amount of money goes in. So in order to control that, it wouldn't be that difficult if I called from the button, right? Because I could check behind, or I could call and see how often they lead into me. I get a ton more information. So out of position, I'm just probably gonna fold. Yay, I folded. ECU limp folds again, so I'm just gonna continually pick on those players, and eventually they'll get fed up, and I'll tighten up and stop doing that, or do it lighter for value and bet multiple streets because they'll eventually call down. Like when a tight and passive player who plays pretty weak post flop and just folds a lot, when they continually do that hand after hand after hand, they eventually become humongous calling stations. So uh, at some point in the match, if we play an extended match, he's gonna get sick of that, and he's just gonna start calling down with bottom pair and ace high, and you can just value bet them to death. So once you do sense that they are gonna start calling you down, I mean, stop bluffing, start value betting. Ace two suited again. It's probably a fold at a lot of tables, but the two players behind me don't three bet and really don't play that often and won't give me too much trouble. So I think it's an open from the hijack there. Jack 8-6 with a flush draw really hits a range of hands where he's flatting with, right? So, I mean, when he simply calls before the flop, doesn't 3-bet, I think it's slightly more likely he has a pair, a pocket pair that he would is ahead of me anyway, or middling cards which have pairs there or straight draws and sometimes flush draws. So when he leads into me on that board, I feel pretty comfortable folding. It's a board that hits his range a lot more than it hits mine, and um, occasionally, I mean, you don't try to win every pot. You try to win a lot of pots, but in spots like that where it looks like it hits his range, and you're just gonna have to put multiple uh, bets and raises in post flop to win. I think better safe to just like cut your losses and give up pretty quickly. This is Ace King. Last week I got into like a bad spot with David Markovich where I 3-bet Ace King and um, I think got owned a little bit post flop when I C bet and he raised my turn bet on a 4 straight board and I folded. But like I plan on 3-betting him some percent of the time. Like he's stealing 44% of the time, so he plays similarly to us. And Ace King ranks to be way ahead of his range and way ahead of his calling range. So I mean, clearly I'm going to want to 3-bet for value. And fortunately, he folds because he had position on us, and Ace King is sort of hard to play. Um, it's sort of hard to play post flop out of position when you miss. So Simon or whatever his name is sits to our direct right on table rough, the bottom left table. I recognized his name a little bit from 2+2 and like the forums. I think he's a regular. Probably plays like a standard regular. Excuse me, that's my dog barking. If you can hear that, let me pause it. Alright, so sorry if you heard that. I'm at my parents' house making this video, and we have a beagle, and he loves to bark. Um, so beagle lovers out there, you can relate. But anyway, okay, so Simon regular, so he probably plays, I don't know, probably 2018 standard late position isolate razor, similar to our style. So it's going to be interesting because in this particular match, I kind of went out of my way to make his life miserable because I knew he was going to open in late position, and there will be quite a few spots from this point forward. So I guess the remainder of this video, and then over the course of the next, where he's gonna open 10 from the button. I'm gonna make his, I mean, from the cutoff, I'm gonna make his life miserable from the button by 3-betting a ton, and then we'll get into some spots and we'll talk about those and why I'm doing it, and rather than just mindlessly aggressing someone, I'll explain my reasonings for each decision. Okay, so Ace Jack suited in the top right, strong hand. I think in a squeeze spot, it's going to be a little bit too weak for value, I think, because Baby Don't Cry, playing 2018, open for first position, and I mean, his hand ranks to be pretty strong there, like on average. And I think it's a little bit a little bit too weak for value, a little bit too strong to turn into a bluff. So I think I'd feel a lot more comfortable just flatting here, playing post flop, than putting tons of money in pre flop. And the board comes 8-9-5 club club. This is interesting. So I mean, it doesn't fit our hand very well, but this is a pot that we can win a lot, and a pot that we should be looking to win a lot. And I'll explain why. So Nate, Baby Don't Cry, he opens under the gun. So what's his range going to be? His range is going to be probably all pairs, and then I guess maybe Ace 10 plus, King Jack plus. It's a lot of overcards that miss because if he did have tens or better, or like Ace 9 or something like that, we expect him to bet here, right? On this coordinated of a board, and on a if he did have overpair, he's definitely betting. If he does check, what does that mean about his range? Well, he has an underpair here that can't continue, like pocket fours, pocket threes, pocket twos, or two Broadway cards that only miss that, unless it's Jack 10 or maybe like Queen Jack, so the two overs together, probably can't continue as well, right? So Baby Don't Cry, for the most part, when he checks here, intends to check fold because two things. When Nate flat calls behind him, his range a lot of the time is going to be his perceived range, I guess, is going to be pairs and suited connectors, suited gappers, and that's basically what my perceived range is going to be as well, right? I'm going to be calling with 7-8, 8-9, 6-7, 5-6 suited, all those suited hands, a lot of pairs. So when it gets checked twice to me, I do have ace high here. It might or might not be the best hand, probably not. But a spot where this board coordinates so well with my perceived flat calling range pre-flop that I can bet here and take it down a lot of the time, right? Baby don't cry, won't be able to continue. And basically, I think the only person that can continue here is Nate. So it's a spot where you see a board and you say, okay, that's had to hit someone. I have ace jack. I'm gonna like check behind and kind of give up on the pot. I mean, no, like this is a spot where you can pick up 11 and a half big blinds most of the time by betting here because it fits so well in your range. And Nate calls. So like I said, I didn't think Baby Don't Cry could call that often. I think it hit Nate quite a bit. So when Nate doesn't check raise me or lead himself, what's that mean about his range? Well, I don't think he has 8-9. I don't think he has a set, right? I'm almost positive most players will be check raising two pair or set on that board because it's so dry. So what he does have is 5-6, 5-7, 7-8, 7-9, 9-10. Pocket sixes, pocket sevens a lot of the time, or a flush draw. So I suspect a lot of the time he's going to have that type of hand. So now we have a decision. Do we want to just fire that one and kind of give up, or do we want to fire two or fire three, right? Firing one is fine. Firing two is awful. Here's why. Like if he has 5-6, 5-7, 7-8, all the pair plus gutter hands, pocket sixes, pocket sevens, he's going to peel again because his I mean, we could have missed over cards, we can have flush draw, we can have whatever else. And he's going to call with a lot of those hands because he still has a fair amount of equity. So if we do fire two, because I don't expect too many calls, I'm firing most rivers. Like any non-5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 river, I'm going to be firing for near pot because I think at that point, he's not going to have a pair and a gutter anymore, or a pair and a flush draw. He's going to have third or fourth pair, and he's going to have to really soul read me and pick me off and call a third barrel. So here's a spot where I think you should fire one and give up, or fire three. Firing two is going to be really bad. Even though the king is like a good scare card, I think he is peeling quite a bit to two and check folding river a lot of time at three. So it helps a ton that we picked up a flush draw as well, because now our bet doesn't need to work as often because we have equity to go along with it. But he checks. Like I said, I bet, and I very much like the bet here. And I'm betting on the bigger side, so it sets up, like I said earlier, it sets up about a pot-sized river shove. I'm betting 23 here. If he calls, the river will be $71, and I kind of wish I bet 24 because it would have made it like exactly like a pot-sized river shove, but it's pretty close to a pot-sized river shove, and I think that maximizes my fold equity. So if I made it $2 more on the flop, it would have been about a pot size shove, and he snapped raises with $3.85 behind. So he insta folded. I don't think he's folding any pair there. Fairly certain he just had a club draw. But my reasoning, I think, is still perfectly fine for barreling that board rather than two barreling. Two barreling's not going to show a profit. Okay, so I think that will wrap up this portion of the second part of the video, and I'll continue again for next week. And I think the third part is going to be like really interesting. We get to mess with the regular in position a little bit, show you how to really maximize a lot of spots against regulars when they're sitting to your direct right. Like hopefully in the future too, if I make other videos at 100, I'll have a regular on my left and how to deal with that. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. At the end of the third part next week, I will be like showing you guys my positional stats from Holder Manager for this session. So this is Nguyen, otherwise known as SoCalQuest with BlueFirePoker, signing off. Have a good one.